Merril, I think Pat McAfee's a very talented guy. I think his show is entertaining. I agree with him. The way they built it from the ground up is pretty incredible. But I also knew that the moment he moved to ESPN, like it or not, he was going to be viewed as a sellout. Now, that's funny coming from anyone else that doesn't make the money Pat McAfee makes, because you probably would have sold out too for the amount of money he's going to make and the lack of headache he's going to have now that ESPN is producing his show and he's not doing it on his own. He's not paying for health insurance coverage for his employees, all of those things. So while I don't blame him, I knew that this criticism was coming. And now, Merril, especially when a lot of talent that people have known over the years for a long time that you've known, when they're let go, it's natural for people to point the finger and say, well, this guy's there now and he's making a lot of money.
Well, you just said it. When you point fingers and you cast blame and you make excuses, that is a toxic way to live. Now, listen, this actually started over a decade ago. Okay, when I first got to ESPN, one of the greatest leaders ESPN's ever had is George Bodenheimer. And I'm going to start and end right there. The whole problem is leadership. And that is where it starts and ends at ESPN. Their leadership is weak. Their leadership is atrocious. And they self-inflicted all of these wounds. I can't remember. It was like almost 15 years ago. We had a talent meeting. I mean, everybody, every sport was there. And they announced how they were going to shift. All right? I remember, I'll never forget the chart they threw up. I think it was 37%. I know it was in the 30s, like 37% built ESPN. Because I didn't really understand why we were there, but everybody was there. They go 37% built ESPN, they're never going to leave. As soon as I heard that comment, I'm like, okay, that is just a ridiculous way to think of anything, thinking that you got something that nobody's going to leave, especially if you're going to change how you're going to approach things. So, like, we built this on these people because we taught sports, we entertained sports, we helped you learn about sports. Not going to do that anymore. If you remember, this is when
it's a very arrogant way of thinking too, that you can never do anything to turn someone off.
Honestly, I mean, arrogant and dumb. I mean, when I'm sitting there, I'm just like, this is not really happening. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. So I remember when they put Dennis Miller in the booth. Okay, this was part of their thinking and talking. Now, this comes from leadership, okay? This has nothing to do with Pat McAfee or talent. This is leadership. This is what we're going to do. We're going to cross-pollinate sports. Okay, forget about educating people and teaching people. And keep in mind, like, most people don't like a sport or they're not interested in a sport. Why? Because they don't understand the sport. And that's what ESPN did such a good job of. They help you understand the sport. They help you teach the sport. And that's actually, when I was hired, what I was asked to do. Help educate people, teach them the sport, bring them into the game so they understand the game better. Okay, now I know I can do that. So we're going to cross-pollinate. People that like comedy and funny, well, they're going to watch football now because we've got Dennis Miller there. As soon as I heard that, I was like, that's the dumbest thing. I don't care if you put Peyton Manning throwing the checkered flag. I'm not going to watch the Daytona 500.
That's a great comparison, too.
I am not a fan of the Daytona 500. But if you help me understand car racing like my brother understands it, I don't get it. But because in this day that they did this, they showed some NASCAR, drafting. When you hear the word drafting, what does that mean? Okay, well, I don't know what drafting means. I'm like, what does that mean? Two cars are really close together. That's only visual you're
I only know
me.
because of Days of Thunder.
Okay.
The movie.
But now,
that's it. The only reason I know that.
But what they did is part of this thing, they're like, well, we're going to add this graphic to show drafting. And you see the flow chart from the colors from the one going from one car into the other. I'm telling you, for the time that they were doing that, I was captivated. I was like, holy cow. Okay. I raised my hand, and I just said, I know nothing about racing, but you just helped me understand it a little better by a visual. That helped me. I wanted to watch it because of that. I don't care that you put an NFL player there that's going to drop the checker. In fact, that doesn't mean anything to me. Well, we all know what happened there. That blew up in their face because, they got accused of scripting all these jokes, and Dennis Miller denied it, and then they forgot to kill the mic. He forgot to hit the talk back button. And he's like, where are we on the script? I think it was a Hall of Fame game. Okay, so now it's exposed. Everybody's heard it. You scripted it, okay? You can only lie so much. You get exposed for your integrity, and ESPN gets exposed for it. And for not having it is actually what they're getting exposed for. It's better to be exposed for having it than not having it. So they make the shift. That's when they put Ron Jaworski in and John Gruden in. It went back to football, and it reset itself. And then after that, when they got rid of Jaws, and eventually, John left, they made the commitment to this is what they wanted to do. We're going to debate. We want to debate. Okay, you self-inflicted that. You asked to do that, okay? Don't blame the talent. Pat McAfee doesn't have to take the woes for this. This happened years ago. This started years ago. People are being let go because nobody's watching them. What they teach you now, it is eroded. They teach you nothing. They give you nothing. People aren't entertained by that. People don't follow that. People don't want to watch that. People want to learn about sports, be educated on sports. And actually, if you and I just still go back to their leadership. Their leadership is weak and atrocious. And all you got to do is go by what they say. Well, this is what we're starting to do. Okay, as a leader, I can tell you this, for example. If you're going to establish a culture, then you better enforce it. If you establish it and you don't enforce it, you're no longer a leader. Your leadership is horrible.
Yep.
In fact, that is the weakest leader that you could possibly have. And ever since George Bodenheimer, it's been like that, unfortunately.
Well, and so getting back to that story, talking about setting a rule and then not enforcing it on all sides and with everyone.
Worst part of leadership, you do that.
Is the Sage Steele dilemma they're in right now. Of course, Sage Steele went on Jay Cutler's podcast, said some things about COVID mandates, said some things about Barack Obama, and was disciplined by ESPN. And ESPN basically said, hey, we're not a political organization. This is Jimmy Pitaro saying that. So we don't want to talk politics. We don't want people talking politics in their free time or on their Twitter accounts or on other podcasts or whatever it may be. But what they were really saying was, we don't like what Sage Steele is saying.
Well, some people will say. Right.
Exactly. Or the criticism that she's going to get from certain circles of social media and the media at large. So she's going to be disciplined.
Right.
But meanwhile, the Supreme Court makes a ruling about affirmative action, and Sarah Spain and Chris Canty and others, they have a similar opinion to what most people in media, what most at ESPN, probably most, and certainly what most in mainstream media would have about this issue. And because they share that, it's not a problem. They're not going to be disciplined at all. And this does, Merril, go back to, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be consistent with punishment. If you're not going to be about political takes or social commentary, and you want it to be more about the sport, which, by the way, when ESPN was at its most entertaining, I'm growing up with it, and SportsCenter, they were entertaining. They were fun, but it was about the sports.
Right.
The catchphrases, everything. It made it fun. It made it entertaining. It was information also. ESPN still does a good job producing games. That's what they're best at doing.
That's all they have.
And showing the live sports.
All they have.
And it's also what people watch, right, are the live sports. But, Merril, even that during COVID, I'd watch college basketball games, and these crews would be at their separate homes, and they were talking about anything but the game.
Right.
And I thought that even COVID ruined that in a lot of ways, where it got people so comfortable at home that it was like they were talking about anything going on in the games in front of them, but because they're watching it on a monitor, they're not focusing on the game that I'm tuning in to watch at that point. A lot of that stuff is troubling, but I kind of agree with you. I think it goes back to leadership, and we're seeing that with the reaction to the Supreme Court ruling and the fact that those ESPN employees, they're not being dealt with in any way.
Well, let me tell you this. I mean, listen, weak and they're hypocrites, and that's the leadership that you've gotten there, and all you have to do is look what's going on there. When you lack that inconsistency, look, listen, at the end of the day, ESPN is about what? You don't know it anymore, but it was all built on and founded on what? Sports. Entertaining and teaching sports, period. You got all other kinds of channels that are political channels. You got options to go there. Stick with sports. Stick with educating, teach with entertaining and informing. And it's not that dang hard. But this is not, okay, for anybody to point at Pat McAfee, go back to about 15 years ago when ESPN decided to make this shift based on the leadership choices and their leadership direction. Okay, that's where it all went bad. And that's where, and they're paying the price for that now. It has everything to do with leadership. It has nothing to do with Pat McAfee. Zero to do with him.